Good afternoon. I'm going to be discussing policy change to improve evidence development for older adults with cancer, kind of a summary and personal thoughts about the issue of geriatric oncology and how to move forward. I've subtitled this talk, If Not Us, Who? If Not Now, When? Which kind of puts my feelings about how geriatric oncology has been studied over the past decades. I call this the struggle for geriatric oncology. We have met the enemy and he is us. We need the data. We know how to get the data, but we're not doing the appropriate studies. We're not designing studies for older patients. And when available, we often do not recommend studies for our patients. I go back to 1983 to show you how long this issue has been around. Rosemary Yancer conducted a symposium at the NCI looking at issues about geriatric oncology. She came up with a number of recommendations, which are still pertinent today, looking at factors unique to old age, baseline data, and interdisciplinary team approach. Those words in 1983 are still important today. In 1989, the FDA looked at the study of drugs likely to be used in the elderly. And then 8 years later, in 1997, they published this guidance for industry. From the 1989 document, again, they talked about including patients in clinical trials that reflect the population who will receive the drug when marketed. And they go on to describe the importance of studying cancer in older patients, again, over 30 years ago. Last year, I should say, in March 2020, we had this guidance from the FDA, inclusion of older adults in cancer clinical trials. The FDA has a tremendous role to play in studying cancer in the older patient, particularly looking at the issue of drug approvals through pharma. Over the years, I characterize as a carrot and stick approach to these proposals. There have been a number of things that they have proposed, such as prolonging the patent life of the drug approvals with expansion trials and other subset analyses, and eligibility to account for comorbidity. Unfortunately, none of these proposals have really taken life, and none of them has increased the number of older patients on study. There are a number of things we unequivocally know. Older patients with cancer are different and more complicated. Performance status is an adequate measure of the older cancer patient. Some form of cancer-directed geriatric assessment gives information, and important information for the care of patients. Prospective data confirms the benefit of geriatric assessment. And the need is great because as the population is now expanded, we need much more data as treatment becomes more complicated with that increasing population. And the issue is we do know how to obtain this information. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. ASCO has been extraordinarily helpful. They've published these two papers looking at improving the evidence base treating older adults with cancer. And they outline a number of steps which are very important to consider when doing studies and evaluations. More recently, Dr. Moheely and her group through ASCO looked at the practical assessment and management of vulnerabilities of older patients receiving chemotherapy, an ASCO guideline report. I call that the universal data set. She refers to it as the minimum data set, but I call it the universal data set because if we do these few measures, we will get a tremendous amount of information to help us design studies and give us guidance to take care of patients. I want to emphasize that this guidance are very simple measures. They're very simple questions to discuss with the patient, such as you could watch the patient walk, issues about weight loss, depression, does the patient live independently or dependently? And all of these issues are very simple to obtain and are adaptable to multiple clinical trial environments. ASCO has also looked at adapting eligibility. This was published more than 3 years ago about broadening the eligibility criteria to make clinical trials more representative. And again, while not specifically for the older patients, it would have the most effect on getting older patients on clinical trials. A part of that evaluation in modernizing clinical trial eligibility criteria is what I call that eligibility addresses realities. that this subgroup of organ dysfunction, prior concurrent malignancies, and comorbidities are very, very important to get older patients on trial, because this is the subset of patients where these issues are particularly pertinent and will lead patients not to be put on clinical trials for not meeting sometimes very arbitrary and unnecessary eligibility requirements. So if not now, when? We've had 40 years of discussion of need. We've had multiple prospective studies showing the benefit of geriatric evaluation. We've had multiple position papers and guidance. And we've had multiple organizations emphasizing research and promoting the geriatric oncology agenda. The organizations involved I've listed: ASCO, SIOG, ESMO, the cooperative groups, and the Cancer and Aging Research Group. Despite all this efforts, we still have a number of deficiencies. We have lack of integration of geriatric principles into oncology practice. Investigator-initiated research does not include the necessary baseline geriatric assessment, such as using the example of the Mohealy paper. Pharma has been unwilling to incorporate geriatric principles or specific studies for older patients, despite FDA initiatives. Journals are not insisting on the report of data specific for older patients. And even when studies are available, clinicians are not encouraging the participation of older patients on clinical trials. I've just suggested a number of initiatives which we could consider. Physician education needs to be expanded from medical school onwards. Professional societies need to continue the emphasis on these issues. And again, there's the major role of the FDA. I had mentioned the prior but failed carrot and stick approaches for investigators and pharma to put older patients on trial and to use geriatric specific assessments. We do have the ability, however, to move forward. Multiple stakeholders are working together in this group. Multiple international oncology societies have had input. Multiple recommendations and task forces have been published and discussed, and multiple investigators are invested in this area of research. If not now, when? The answer could only be one thing: it's now. The clinical trial infrastructure and regulatory bodies need to require this kind of evaluation. The FDA needs to be more stringent with their recommendations. The high impact journals need to require the analysis necessary to adequately describe older patients on study. Insurers need to recognize the time these kind of evaluations will take, and very importantly, reimburse patient expenses, because patient cost, out-of-pocket costs, can be a tremendous barrier for older patients to participate on clinical trials. We have to incentivize clinicians to put patients on study. Information technology should be used to simplify data acquisition and recording, and be used to assess function through various monitors, and to analyze and establish large databases. Future clinical trial design must definitely include patient-physician choice, because I think that becomes more acceptable when older patients are faced with a randomized trial. Minimize office visits and minimize tests to the bare minimum. So just some final thoughts. This expanding, largely vulnerable population needs to be the focus of our endeavors. They deserve nothing less. And to quote the Psalms, "Do not cast me away when I am old. Do not forsake me when my strength is gone." Please consider the older patients as the most important group to face in cancer research going forward. Thank you very much.